We love camping. And by we, I mean my wife and I. Especially in remote places where many people tend not to go. The country we live in has all sorts of environments, mountains, beaches, and forests that span across vast hills like a green blanket. Our favorite has always been the beaches, or the forests that lay near them, for they are cool with fresh air, and one has the option to swim and observe the marine life. And even catch some fish if you are lucky. Once, we caught a 10-pound bonito off the coast. The meat lasted for 3 days. We have all kinds of gear for all types of situations. A set of solar panels and a lithium battery pack for any energy requirements, separate tents for toilet and shower needs, a very compact cooking station, and several types of tents for all environments. In the end, it was all about being self-sufficient and enjoying what nature offered us. We both enjoyed the time spent while we camped. Being in the woods, near the beaches, and out in the wilderness. It was good to be on the same page with your significant other. Having said that, we had different priorities for camping. She was much more organized within and outside the tent. I respected that and tried not to interfere with her daily routine. I preferred cooking and crafting more. We had routine activities like watching our favorite shows before sleep and spending hours talking about movies, books, and all the intellectual stuff the world has to offer. Doing all this, while being able to observe the stars and listen to the ominous sounds of the creatures of the night was inestimable by any currency. The most memorable of all our camping trips was when we visited the Ember Peak Range several years ago. As the name suggests, the Ember Peak Range was a mountainous terrain raised by volcanic activities many years ago. Although most of them were dormant, the range still had active craters and hot water springs here and there. Conical in shape, there are more than 20 peaks spanning approximately 200 miles along the way and a single summit with an altitude of more than 13,000 feet. There were trekking roads that led to the peak, but they were dangerous and barren. On top of that, the volcanic activity around the summit was at its maximum. So we decided not to take that road and constructed a 2-week camping route with our 4x4 road vehicle, stopping along the valleys and plateaus that were relatively crowded. We were still inexperienced with that type of camping trip back in the day, so it was the safest option to do so. We started our journey from the southern part of the mountain range and rode for 5 hours through the treacherous terrain. We were both exhausted when we reached our first settlement. The preparations took another 3 hours, but we were ready for a peaceful night before dusk. I still remember when we were ready to eat and chat about the road, the nature around us, beneath our well-constructed porch out of a tarp and poles. A tepid breeze swiped our weary bodies as we ate the pre-cooked food and the tasty pasta salad made by my beautiful wife. As the night fell upon us, we prepared a bonfire and sat beside it to get warmth. The crackling sound of moisture escaping the wood calmed our spirits. We drank some of that hunter's liqueur and went to sleep. I, although feeling rested and calm, couldn't sleep that night. I was always alert when we visited places like this for the first time, but there was something off. First of all, for the first night, there were no other campers around us. We saw some lights moving outside in the distance, but they were either rangers or people passing by. I thought maybe we made a mistake by settling here, since it was known to be an area with rich wildlife like wolves, bears, and mountain lions. I was sure of our tent, we were safe inside, but I couldn't sleep anyway. I felt eyes and a presence around us, but I couldn't tell her that night as I was afraid of her reaction and didn't want to alert her based on my instincts. Several times during the night, I woke up and checked outside. Nothing. Nothing seemed to move, nothing seemed to be alive, which was strange in itself. With dawn, I was just glad that the night was over. She woke up a few hours later, to the sound of boiling water and crackling bacon on the stove. It was strange, even for her, since I was the sleepyhead on all our adventures. She asked if there were any problems, but I said everything was all right and I couldn't simply sleep. She sensed something was off, but didn't say anything, probably because of the same reasons I didn't tell her my concerns. Other than my unusual behavior in the morning, everything was in good order for the rest of the day. We walked along the tree line, gathered wood before noon, and spent time together around the campsite. At dusk, we ate dinner and employed ourselves with our hobbies. She chose a playlist of relaxing songs, and I took out my carving set. She was busy knitting a scarf with a teddy bear design on it. I personally found it really hard and was amazed at her skill. I told her this, maybe for the 100th time since we met, and she complimented me back by saying carving a wooden stick into a knitting needle was as hard and complex as knitting a teddy bear pattern. I didn't buy it but kissed her forehead and told her how much I loved her, for she was such a supportive person. As hours passed, the last lights of dusk went by, and the moon showed herself in full beauty and grace. The sky was cloudy that night. The moon was peeking here and there, creating a gloomy atmosphere around us. That feeling I felt the night before was not there, but I still felt a bit cautious and anxious deep down. I wanted to tell her I was boiling inside, but I kept all those feelings to myself that night. Somehow she sensed my unease and spoke up about it right before we were about to gather our gear and go to bed. Again, I told her not to worry about me and said I was just cautious by nature since we were alone. She told me she was comfortable and felt safe, and if I had any concerns, we could pack tomorrow morning and move on to the next camping site along the way. I thanked her, and we went inside the tent. I decide to read my book before I go to bed. She dozed off the moment her head hit the soft pillow. I was dizzy myself from last night, but I pursued reading at least 2 chapters before I pan out. The book I was reading was a collection of short stories. The author was not famous or talented, but she had one good quality that stood out for me: the way she captured the essence of fear and mystery. It was not a good book to read for an anxious and alerted mind, but, nevertheless, I slept like a baby that night. Maybe since my body was so tired, my concerns and anxiety were halted. We both woke up at the same time, to the same sound of talking, and quickly got up on our feet. I grabbed my OTF knife, stuck it on my hip, and went outside the front door of our tent. The sound was coming from 2 people in full gear, right beside our 4x4, talking to each other. I slowly approached and saw that they were campers just like us, looking for a camping ground where they could settle. But unlike us, they were on a hiking trip and wanted to camp for a night and move on the next morning. I told them we had food and all the hospitality they may require. They settled 20 yards apart from us. They were also a couple and were glad they found us since they, just like us, also didn't see any people along the way. They had a single tent, a very small one, but it was lightweight and compact, fit for their purposes. They had all sorts of gear, much like we do, but everything was either miniaturized or made to be much more compact and light. They even had a stove to cook and boil water. I, being the big spender of our relationship, took notes of their gear and planned the shopping frenzy for the next camping season. We had breakfast, lunch, and dinner together and went about our daily chores and routines in between. We were all gathered around a bonfire relocated between our and their tents by nightfall and sat there getting our stiff muscles and bones precious warmth they desperately needed. They were good people, and we spent the night with them. My anxiety was gone completely, and I felt comfortable, but this comfort was cut short by our new friends as they expressed their concerns. The man was a biologist who worked around the area and was very knowledgeable about the habitat and animals of the Ember Peak Range. It was not their first time hiking through the mountain range, but he told us that he observed a strange lack of wildlife this time. There usually would have been at least howling of the jackals and barn owls during the night, but there was nothing but pure silence. He seemed concerned, maybe because of his occupation or maybe with the same ominous feelings I felt, but we didn't push the subject further. Instead, we shared stories of our adventures. In the end, we were all happy and tired and went to bed. I accommodated our new friends in their tent and told them I was a light sleeper and they could disturb us anytime if they needed anything during the night. It was a lie, of course, partially at least, since I was a heavy sleeper and didn't want to be woken up during the night. Nevertheless, they didn't disturb us, and neither did we disturb them during the night, and they were already packed when we woke up. I thought it was early, even for us, but they told us covering ground before noon was crucial for any hiking trip. We invited them for breakfast, but they gently refused and moved along with their journey. We chatted during and after breakfast about how sweet they were and criticized them for not eating breakfast with us. In the end, we decided that eating more without company was better, especially when you were camping. I was hopeful that more would come and maybe stay longer since I felt disturbed and vulnerable. I was not afraid of wild animals. To be honest, we were ready for that kind of encounter, or at least we thought so. Bear spray and all, we had everything, and we had a car, unlike our hiker friends. Bears were strong and smart, at least to an extent, but they were still ages away from opening a locked car door. We went by our daily routines till noon. I ventured further along the tree line and heard the sound of running water. It was exciting since we were getting low on water, and we might catch some trout if it was a big enough river. I invited her, and we searched for the river. It was relatively deep inside the forest. We walked for a good 10 minutes. As we located the source, it was revealed that it was not just a river, but a waterfall more than 12 feet high. A small pond, much like you may find in a luxury house garden, was formed beneath the waterfall, and the water was crystal clear. She touched the water and said that it was ice cold. We decided to carry some of it back to camp and bring our chairs and fishing rod, so we could enjoy this natural beauty. After several trips back and forth, we settled beside the pond. I was not so lucky and only caught 3 rainbow trout, 2 of them being below the legal catching size. We kept the legal-sized trout and prayed for another one, but we had no luck. We gathered our stuff and went back to the tent. We boiled the water we brought from the river pond and filled the spare canisters. The sky was clear, and the night was dark. We sat beside the tent and watched the stars. I have never seen stars this vibrant, with colors spanning across the spectrum. The sound of silence was cut by a rustle. Distant yet clear. We looked around but there was nothing to see. Jackals, or maybe a lone wolf, I commented. She hit my arm and said not to scare her. I said I wasn't trying to and sat closer to her, wrapping my arm around her. 10 maybe 20 minutes later, we heard the same sound. It was closer this time, but I didn't mention that. We both stood up and went around the tent. There was almost nothing a wild animal could mingle around the camp. We had everything inside the tent or the car. Almost all the meat was inside the fridge. There was nothing around, so I took one of the overpowered hand lights and looked toward the vast plateau. She did the same for the opposite side. The light was absorbed into darkness. There was nothing to see, but the hills and grass stretched the plateau. As I closed and turned off the light, I heard her whispering voice. "Come, come," she said. I walked near and saw what she saw. There it was. A wolf, a dire wolf. Its eyes reflected the light. It was more than 60 yards away, yet it was visible with all its might. It was black, easily standing out from the rest of the surroundings. She focused the light on it. It was locked on us like an unmoving object. We stood there for a minute or two. Then I whispered in a voice I thought only she could hear, "Let us go inside." She nodded and we slowly backed up toward the tent, still focusing the light on the wolf. I saw it moving forward towards us, not running but stepping a few. I zipped the tent door and closed all the windows as we got inside. She closed the light. I was almost able to hear her heartbeat. I whispered to her to calm down and suggested we sleep. We did so, not easily of course, since an enormous wolf was lurking beside the camp. It was almost like a mythical creature, something you would see in a movie. We talked for a while inside our sleeping bags and fell asleep after a while. I woke up once to an eerie sound that night. A distant howl, followed by many more. A call to the council of the night. The next morning, we woke up as usual. She was the first one to peek outside as I was still inside the warm sleeping bag. "Ugh, smells horrible," she said. I too felt the horrid smell as the tent door was open. "What is it?" I asked and got off the bed. We discovered it was poop. A giant poop, probably left by our wolf friend, to mark the spot, probably. I took the poop with a shovel and threw it far. It was probably one of the worst things I smelled. We ate breakfast and chilled for a while. Although we were supposed to move on the next day, I suggested we pack and move on tonight. Maybe spend the night in our car and settle to the next plateau first thing in the morning. I told her the howl I heard during the night. She agreed but didn't want to ride after dusk, so we decided to pack and stay here until dawn and move on. We started packing afternoon. It was an unusually hot day, we were sweating all over. At last, we showered and cooked a small dinner. We were beside the car with our foldable chairs, a small camping stove, and a small freezer. Somehow we were relaxed, forgetting last night's encounter. Although it was not violent, or we felt any physical danger, the possibility was still on the table. Possibility of being a juicy dinner for a giant wolf. As we were slowly chatting and enjoying the colors of our galaxy, the tranquility we were in was cut short by a deafening scream from the woods. It was so close and clear that we were startled and were not able to move for a good 15 seconds. As the initial shock left our bodies and adrenaline rushed into our bloodstream, we jumped from our seats and threw everything in sight and ourselves inside the car. Another shriek cut through the curtain of silence, closer and much more prominent. She was visibly afraid, as I am, since it was not a sound we had heard before. I suspected a mountain lion since they were notoriously famous for their mating screams, or another wild animal in notorious pain. I started the car and stepped on the gas pedal without wasting a moment. Headlights illuminated the vast plain ahead of us. I flicked the button to turn on the roof lights. We were shining like a sun in the middle of the night. I rode, without thinking, and after a while realized that I had taken several wrong turns. Pissed off and afraid of what we heard back in the camp, we turned back and found the right way towards the next camping site. We were both hesitant to talk. Maybe we both wanted to go back home, but we didn't want to be the one to ruin the trip. We talked about the sound, of course. She was sure that it was the wolf from the last night, or another one, or several that hunted in the area. I just hoped it was wolves, and if they were hunting, I knew we were not on the menu. Wolves are smart, I thought, they knew we were not tasty. We were now moving, elevating through the range, deeper into the wilderness. "It is," she whispered. "It is?" I answered. She did not reply. I wonder what she was thinking. But I did not ask. Some things are better left alone. Thoughts, dark thoughts, and concerns build up like lakes, ready to explode, ripple, and form waves of fear. Sometimes not talking is the answer. I certainly internalized this principle, maybe more than I was supposed to do. The first lights of the morning sun went straight into our weary eyes. We were almost there. Pushing through the exhaustion, we reached our next camping site. Unlike the previous site, the open field was rocky, surrounded by trees and bushes. A steep cliff was located nearby. We couldn't decide where to settle at first, and couldn't able to find a big enough space to install the tent. I suggested settling inside the tree line as I saw a big enough opening. It was close to the edge. Ultimately, we decided not to settle. It was more suitable for hikers. We had too much gear. Arguing about what to do, we decided to leave the mountain and maybe settle in another camp in the foothills. But first, we had to eat and rest. We took out only the essentials and spent some time around the site. The view from the cliff was magnificent. Endless woods and bald peaks were pushing through. Some of them had a smoke, and in the distance, we were able to see the silhouettes of the volcanoes. Eagles, hawks, and many other birds of prey were soaring through the blue sky. Afternoon, we had it all planned. As the night before, we planned to descend back with the first lights of the dawn and leave the mountain range by evening. We slept through the night and woke up around 5 a.m., got off the car to stretch our legs and wash the sleep of our faces. The moment we stepped out, we were slapped by this brutal smell. It was like rotten flesh, feces, and all the gut-wrenching things one can imagine mixed in a witch's cauldron and boiled into a soup. We slowly looked around to locate the source, but there was nothing in sight. Sticking together, we searched for it a bit more. The smell was heightened as we walked towards the cliff, and we saw the thin trail of blood. We followed the bloodline, being careful not to misstep, as the rocks were unreliable. A single miscalculation could have resulted in death. Stepping forward, we saw the great beast lying in a pool of blood. It was grisly, at least it was. Now, Now it was a pile of meat, guts, and dark red blood. The belly of the animal was opened from the neck down between its legs. There were slashes and meat hanging all over, and its guts opened and were leaking bodily fluids, mixing with its feces and blood, creating a cocktail of dismemberment. There was still blood leaking from every orifice on its head. Ears, nose, eyes, and mouth were all bloodied and unrecognizable. Its white teeth were broken and scattered. "I do not know an animal capable of this," I said. She nodded and confirmed my observation. We quickly left the murder scene and ran back to the truck. We quickly gathered what was left of last night and moved along. We were on the road for about 10 minutes. The road was spiraling down the plateau. We were still around the surrounding forest, and the road was covered above with leaning trees. I hoped that there were obstacles along the way. The road was already horrific as it was, and I wasn't in the mood to deal with a fallen tree or a landslide. As I was thinking all this, I had to crash stop before the creature that stood in the middle of the road. We were at least 10 yards apart when our heavy vehicle came to a halt. Ugly, uglier than the corpse we saw earlier, a humanoid creature of sorts stood before us. It had sparse patches of fur around its neck and belly. The back was hunched, and its arms were long, hanging beneath its knees. It had 4 fingers and 4 toes, all armed with claws at least 6 or 7 inches long. Its skin was dark, shaded with gray and occasional white spots. Its head was the creepiest thing I saw with my own 2 eyes. It had no lips, teeth were showing all the way. It was all needle-like and unorganized, as if they were thrown in there with no particular order. Its eyes were huge relative to its head and were slit, just like a snake. It has blood all over its bare skin. And for the last time, we heard that demonic scream as it charged toward the vehicle. I pushed the gas pedal as quickly as possible to run over it. The creature jumped towards us, but couldn't pass by the massive bumper and went flying back. We kept going, aiming to squish it to pieces before it could recover and strike again. With considerable speed, we ran over it. I heard the bones snapping and a weary wail beneath the wheels. I only saw a distant, dark figure lying on the road, looking at the rear mirror. We were both gasping for air as our blood was saturated with adrenaline and all kinds of hormones that enact our survival instincts. We rode for a long time before we felt safe stopping at a water fountain along the road. We washed our faces and drank the cold spring water. I looked behind me, back to the mountain. Maybe it was my imagination, maybe it was real as everything happened that day, but I can swear on everything I hold dear in my life. I saw 2 gloomy eyes, red like embers, looking at us within the woods. We left that mountain never to come back, but the memory of that day still lives with us to this day.